Progressive News Network.
And now, my friends, we've got the interview with Paul Thompson, been working on the Clinton email timeline, putting this information in perspective so that you have an understanding of how this all fits together. I think you'll find this very informative.
Mr. Thompson, this is Richard Spizak with Progressive News Network. How are you today, sir?
Oh, pretty good.
Well, I've got to tell you, you have started one very, very interesting project, and I think from scanning the medium length version, I think you clearly place yourself, as part of what I'm going to call, solid investigative journalism, and you suggest, and I think spell out from your documentation that you're not what the Clinton camp might call one more Hillary basher. I think there is a very important story to be told when a public servant, and I use that language specifically, works to avoid having a paper trail. And I think that simply, to me, is the first problem. And
right.
Why don't you kind of talk a little bit about now you did this other timeline of the terrorist plot in your first book with HarperCollins. Why don't you kind of talk a little bit about that first, and then we'll talk specifically about the Clinton timeline you've developed.
Right. Well, in both cases, there were things where I felt like there was important information that needed to get to the public, and it wasn't getting to the public. I don't normally do this sort of stuff, but I just, every now and then, I feel compelled to try to get the word out about something that I feel is really important. And, back around the time of 9/11 and for quite a few years after that, I felt, and I still do feel, that terrorism has really been a misunderstood thing. You remember those were the days of they hate us for our freedoms and that sort of stuff. And and so what people were hearing, what people were hearing at the time, and it was this very simplistic version of events, and then the actual what was going on was much more complicated. So I was trying to get that out, and a timeline seemed like a good way to go. And then with this more recent case, it's a very similar thing where I feel like, I was just your average Democratic voter about a year ago. I would have been happy to vote for Hillary Clinton. I didn't really think much about this whole email scandal. I thought the Benghazi scandal was kind of a witch hunt, and this seemed to be just more of the same. And so I wasn't paying it much attention, and then I, continued to hear little bits here and there, and I kind of had a eureka moment where I realized, wait a minute, this actually seems really serious. I started hearing about these top secret level emails, and that really opened my eyes. So I kind of went down a rabbit hole when I started to look more and more into it, and I became more convinced that this was some serious criminal behavior on Hillary's part. And that concerns me, of course, because being a liberal, I want to see a Democrat win in November. I certainly don't want to see Donald Trump win. And yet it looked like Democrats are going to nominate somebody who has this Achilles heel, this fatal flaw. And so my whole point in putting this timeline together is to get this information out prior to the Democratic convention, because I feel that there's going to be, as they say, the other shoe is going to drop, that the FBI investigation is going to come out with their final recommendations almost certainly before the convention. And at that point, people are going to say, wait a minute, what is going on with this email scandal? And that's the point where hopefully they can go to this timeline website and really figure out what it's all about for themselves and realize that this is a fatal flaw. And hopefully it's not too late to pick somebody else.
Another aspect of this that to me as a journalist is kind of a base principle. In politics, anybody who thinks about it or who tries to understand it realizes that there's a couple different arenas for political discourse. There is what we might call the fact-based, and then there's the speculative, the kind of dialogue that's nothing more than really just shouting, and it's completely fact-free. And one of the things that a good journalist or a good historian wants to do is to go to the base documents, to look at the actual information that underlies the issue, so that there's no confusion, so that we're actually talking about facts, we're looking at the historical record. So to me, when you have a would-be civil servant who actively thwarts a paper trail, who actively takes steps to destroy, to obfuscate that historical record, that to me, that is what I would call a crime against democracy.
Right, and one reason why I felt compelled to do this, because you're talking about people who talk versus people who actually look at the facts, and I kept hearing from these different experts who would say, oh, there's not really a whole lot to that. I've looked at the emails and they're just kind of boring. And, these so-called experts, they really don't know what they're talking about because they haven't put in the time to actually look closely. And there's a key element, I think, that most people don't appreciate about this whole situation, which is that, there are something like 30,000 of Hillary's emails that have been released, and out of those, 2,000 have been redacted partially or totally, and we don't know what's in those redacted parts. And when the experts look at the emails, they're looking at basically the unredacted stuff, which is the stuff that's not really that interesting. And we don't know, the public, we don't know what's in the classified bits. That's the really important stuff. But we can kind of, if you look closely, you can read between the lines. Sometimes literally, you get a gap in the email and you try to figure out what the missing words are. If you can do that, you can start to see that the redacted parts contain some very, very important information that you wouldn't want the Chinese or the Russians or the North Koreans, etc., to be looking at. And we don't know that, but the FBI knows that. And I think it's a far more serious scandal than people realize who are just looking at the declassified parts.
Well, another point that I think, again, without getting into the details, again, to me, base principles start with, presumption of innocence is based on open-handedness, open files, open records. But as soon as you see records that have been shredded, destroyed, deleted, actively hidden from view, or removed from the historical record, I'm afraid, at least for me as a journalist, as well as a historian, the presumption of innocence just drops off the edge.
Right, and another thing I feel that not a lot of people know about this is, so there were the 30,000 emails that got released, and then Hillary also had another 31,000 emails which she deleted because she said they were personal in nature. And the part that people don't know is that in the past few months, we're more and more seeing some of these emails coming out because, whenever you send an email, you have a copy, and the person that you're sending it to also has a copy. So some of them are coming out in other people's inboxes, and we're learning more. And these are work-related. These are emails that she clearly should have turned over. And in my opinion, what we're seeing is really only the tip of the iceberg. I believe there are actually thousands of these emails that are work-related that she deliberately deleted. And we don't have those, but the FBI most definitely has those. It's been reported that they managed to recover all her emails. So that's another reason why I feel like people don't really understand this, because they're only looking at kind of like the tip of the iceberg, and it's we're going to find a lot of interesting things in those deleted emails. For instance, you probably know recently they had that State Department Inspector General's report come out about a week ago, that or maybe 2 weeks ago now, that made front page news, and that quoted from some emails that were previously unseen by anybody before, and that contained very damning information that Hillary Clinton clearly didn't want people to know. For instance, a couple instances of successful hacking attacks, or apparently successfully hacking attacks, when she'd previously said, there'd never been any hacking into her server. So I think we're going to find more and more things like that in those deleted emails.
Another issue that you raise, and I think very wisely and very pertinently, is you quote from a videotape early on when she basically says, look, it's not in my interest to have any kind of data trail, and I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to avoid that completely. So we essentially see here that there was a plan from the beginning. And now, you mentioned the security issue. I've been in the internet business literally since before there was an internet business, and if we understand that the Army, the Navy, the Pentagon, the CIA, the White House have been hacked at different times, anyone who could propose that a private server kept up part-time by an IT tech is going to be as secure, more secure, or at least even close to the level of security that a government server is really, they just don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole thing was just like a trouble waiting to happen from the get-go. As you point out, I mean, we have this quote from her from way back where she basically indicated that she was not going to even use email because she didn't want anyone to see her emails. Later, she had to change her mind just out of, I think, sheer practicality. She had to use emails as a Secretary of State, so she did the next best thing, and she figured, I will set up this private server so that I will never have to respond to any Freedom of Information Act requests or future investigations or what have you. They'll be my emails, and no one will ever be able to look at them. And so everything we see follows logically from that decision. Like one of the emails that came out that were previously unseen in this Inspector General's report, I don't remember the exact quote, but she basically said something like, this is something that has to be private, speaking about her emails, which completely contradicts everything she said prior to that point, where she claimed it was all about just a matter of convenience is the reason that she did this. So, she didn't cooperate at all, didn't get interviewed by that Inspector General. None of her aides did. Clearly she has a lot to hide on this. And like I said, it's a real Achilles heel, and it's just, in my opinion, it's just going to get worse as more comes out. And the real crucial thing, the $64,000 question, is what is the FBI going to do? I think there's a serious chance I'm not Nostradamus here, but I think looking at the evidence, if they at all are doing their jobs, I think there's plenty of different ways, not just one charge, but a whole bunch of different ways she could be charged for some serious felonies here.
Let me take you in a slightly different direction. I've been a lifelong Democrat. I have been. I will happily concede a lot more progressive than the Clinton team. But I got to tell you, style aside, a comment like when she was asked about wiping the server, she said, "Oh, you mean with a damp cloth?" Now, I mean, okay, 10 points for cute, but this is not an inconsequential situation. And that the historical record, when you work for the people, when you are a civil servant, the people have a right to know about what your actions really were, not the sticky smiley face that you've stuck on it. And then when you have a situation, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I just want to say, I mean, that was a joke, but it was also a clever dodge because, you know, that was coming at a time when people are asking, what was her server wiped, or was it just were the emails deleted? And for people who aren't very technical, it's an important distinction, because the wiping is where you repeatedly overwrite the old data with new data, so that basically someone comes in later, tries to recover that old data, they can't, because it's been written over and over again. So that would show, if you did wipe the server, kind of a deliberate attempt to prevent anyone, such as the FBI, from looking at what was in those deleted emails. And there have been reports that say that her server was wiped. And so, you know, was she going to say that or not? She dodges it with, you know, this joke, and then the next day her spokesperson was asked about it, and that person claimed to not know even what wiping is, you know, which just it just kind of stretches the incredulity of the whole thing, the different dodges and sometimes outright lies that we've seen from Hillary Clinton, like after this Inspector General's report came out, which shot down a number of statements that she's been saying, then she just went on and continued to just keep saying those things even after she'd been clearly contradicted by the evidence. So that kind of gets my goat. That really annoys me. I want somebody as the Democratic nominee to be somebody who can, trounce whoever the other person is with a really strong record, and not be somebody who's got kind of one foot headed towards prison, which is what we're seeing here.
Well, I think you also very, very carefully bring up her criticism of the Bush administration's use of non-governmental servers. So this is not some esoteric issue that she's only peripherally involved in. She was on the record as saying our Constitution is being shredded. We know about the secret wiretaps. We know about secret military tribunals, the secret White House email accounts. It's a stunning record of secrecy and corruption, of cronyism run amok. Now, this from a person who, not only, of course, will do the same thing, but also from a person whose quote, family business is making a buck off international relations while she's running the State Department. Before we get into that issue, I just want to say about that quote. That I think, memories are short, and it's important to keep in mind that when she said that was 2007, and that was a time when there was a big scandal going on having to do with Karl Rove and the Republicans, where, if you remember, there was some shenanigans going on that looked like maybe some political pressure was put on some U.S. attorneys. And so Democrats wanted to look at these emails of Karl Rove and other people. When they asked for them, Karl Rove said, I had them all on a private server, and they were all deleted. Too bad. And so this was a big scandal that went on, and that's why she made that comment at the time, because it was almost exactly what Hillary Clinton then went on to do, which was to put all of her correspondence on a private server exactly like Karl Rove did, and then when somebody comes calling for them, say, sorry, you can't see them, they've been deleted, and so on. Except in her case, I don't know what happened, but there was some sort of incompetence, and she ended up having those emails basically all get recovered by the FBI. So, whereas Karl Rove, he walked away scot-free, I think she's in a lot hotter water. As we go through your timeline, I thought another one of the very interesting pieces you bring to light was that that lapse of the Inspector General. How absolutely, you don't have to be a conspiratorial, tinfoil-hatted person to say, if you have no Inspector General, what kind of oversight is there going to be on governmental activity? And of course, the answer is 0.
Right. For people don't know this, but for 5 years, including the whole time she was Secretary of State, there was no Inspector General in the State Department, and that's like the department's chief watchdog, right?
Right.
Certainly, if there was an Inspector General at that time, that person would have noticed, hey, wait a minute, why does she have a private email account when you're not supposed to do that for a majority government business? In fact, there was a ambassador to Kenya who was having doing basically all of his business through a private email account, and he was in the middle of getting punished so severely that he decided to just resign before he got his full punishment. And so that was during her time, and she knew that was the policy. And then on top of that, that's just the email. There's a whole other problem about having a private server that's holding all those emails, which is something that had been completely unprecedented. So certainly, any halfway competent State Department watchdog would have noticed this and raised red flags.
Well, I'm afraid, at least as far as the Obama administration is concerned, they have a propensity to, I'm going to put it, I think, as gently as I can, to overlook sins of the past, because it's so much more convenient that way. Although, unless you're a whistleblower, in which case those things become a massive issue. I was frustrated, of course, when Obama came into office and he basically said, "Let bygones be bygones," about all the things that happened in the Bush years. But interestingly enough, he did appoint an Inspector General eventually after Clinton left, and that's the person who just came out with his Inspector General's report, which I thought was a pretty good job. And then he also appointed James Comey to be the head of the FBI. And a lot of people say that Comey is sort of an Elliot Ness type, a real person of integrity who has a history of defying political pressure. Like you may remember, there was this famous kind of Ashcroft a hospital incident where John Ashcroft, the Attorney General way back in the Bush days, was sick at the hospital. Yeah. And there was this whole, they should make a movie out of it, the scene with the different government officials rushing to the hospital and trying to get this sick Ashcroft to sign papers when he was not, of sound mind. And so Comey was right in the thick of that and actually got to the hospital first and presented an ultimatum to the other Bush officials to say, look, if you go ahead and do this, I'm going to resign effective immediately. Other people are going to resign. This whole thing will blow up. And so they had to back down. So that was the person that Obama appointed to head the FBI. And I don't know if he was anticipating this kind of situation to come along, but I think Comey really is Clinton's worst nightmare. If we look at his record of him standing up to political pressure, and it's my hope that he will stand up to political pressure this time, and will actually get some serious recommendations for an indictment. Well, I think you're a little more optimistic on that point than I am.
Well, you know what happened? This is something that a lot of other people don't know, is that there was a very similar case of what's his name, the head of the CIA, Petraeus, remember,
right.
who was involved in the scandal with his mistress and so forth, and that case was happening right at the time when Comey was put in. So he was the one who made the recommendations in that case, and this is what a lot of people don't know, is that he recommended very serious felony charges for Petraeus that would have put him behind bars for many years. And what happened was he made those recommendations, and then the Justice Department has to take the next step and actually decide whether to indict or not. And they basically made a sweetheart deal where it was talked down to misdemeanors, and he never served a day in jail. And but I think that shows that if you look at it from just what did Comey do, he did what he was supposed to do, which he looked at the evidence and he recommended felony charges, despite the fact that this person was the head of the CIA. So the problem there was not him. The problem was with the Justice Department. And I've got a feeling that's what's going to happen this time, because the Justice Department is much more a political animal. The Attorney General is sort of like the lawyer of the president. You can remember such past luminaries as Alberto Gonzales and other people of that ilk. So whereas the FBI is supposed to be more insulated, the director gets a 10-year term and so forth. They're supposed to be insulated. So I think the FBI may do something serious. They've been at this for a year. I don't think they would just be working on nothing all that time. But then what's probably going to happen is that you're going to run into this wall of political influence in the Justice Department. But I think it'll be a huge bombshell if we can just at least get the FBI to come out with a recommendation and a report that really looks at the evidence and shows that this serious crimes were involved here. I mean, that's to have that happen in the middle of a presidential election when the person involved is basically the de facto nominee for the Democratic Party at this point. I mean, we're in uncharted waters here. It's going to be very interesting.
Well, I think that you essentially have done a great service to those of us who are interested in finding out what is in fact actually going on, as opposed to what the PR message would have us believe. And I have to thank you for that. But let me ask you this. There's so many levels of problems. There's so many levels of potential damage. Personally, I don't really care about the damage this may do to her long-term political reputation. As a historian, as a journalist, these, and it's certainly not an oversight, but this kind of behavior to limit public access, to destroy records, this is clearly exactly what you don't want in any kind of civil servant. And to essentially bring this woman to the office of the presidency after you already know that she has a propensity to hide the facts, to non-disclose essentially anything, I think it's a real disservice to democracy. And
this is why I feel spun up about this, and I feel like I have to put in a lot of time to get this timeline together, because if she becomes president, the past is a good indicator of what future behavior is going to be. And it's not just the secrecy issue that bothers me. There's this whole other issue we haven't even gone into, and I've made an entire separate timeline on the same website about the Clinton Foundation. And I imagine you know a fair deal about that, but most people don't. And it shows very, very disturbing a tendency towards political conflict of interest. We can see from there what happened when she was Secretary of State, and there were repeated cases of this sort of commingling where some company or some person who had business in front of the State Department was making big donations to her and her husband's private foundation at the same time. And sure, they do a lot of good work. I don't doubt that some of the money actually goes to charity, but some of the money has been reported, does not, and has basically been used like a slush fund. And there's so many different ways you can take advantage of a situation like that. For instance, maybe you've got some big project that does some good in a country, like say in Haiti, and you give that contract to one of your political allies. So you're scoring points even at the same time you're doing charity. And there's this mixture, this blurring of the lines between private gain and public service as a government servant that we have seen time and time again from Hillary Clinton and also Bill Clinton with this foundation. And they've said that they're not going to step back if Hillary were to be president and completely disassociate themselves from the Clinton Foundation. They basically said, hey, they're doing good work, as steady as she goes, we're just going to keep doing what we've done before, no problem, which just scares the heck out of me because there's a really big problem there.
Let me ask you a question. I think if we take the former Secretary of State at her word that when they left the White House, they were just broke. Oh my God, the poor dears. They could barely scrape by and pay their bills. But now they seem to be in quite good shape after public service and charity work, which I think says something also rather dramatic. Can you do you have at the tip of your tongue when actually it was that she left the State Department?
It was February 2013.
February 2013. Okay. The Clinton Foundation, which, if you read the billboard, has been working to help Haiti and many other disadvantaged situations. But we hear again and again how the Secretary of State signs, approves the shipment of arms, and oddly enough, coincidentally enough, large sums of money come from dictators and tyrants and land in the Clinton Foundation. The timeline of the Clinton Foundation activity, how is that? Do you anticipate publishing that as well?
Well, like I said, we've got one already on the website. It's a whole separate timeline because it's related but different. But it's growing fast because I swear every field you look at of business enterprise, it seems there's some sort of disturbing conflict of interest with the Clinton Foundation. As you point out, it happened with arms deals, but it happened with banks. It happened with you name it, just everything, and if that's how it's going to be run when Clinton, if Hillary were to ever be president, it's basically like the presidency for sale. It's extremely disturbing. Something there's never been anything like it in American politics. I mean, we're talking. They went from nothing shortly around the time Bill left office as president to they've now had over $2 billion put into the Clinton Foundation. And they've personally gone from having virtually no money, so they say, to over $200 million, mostly through these huge speaking fees that they get. So they're parlaying their political power and influence into incredible sums of money that just we've never seen the likes of this before. Just imagine how much bigger the stakes will be if she's actually president.
I think that former President Carter probably should have studied a little closer his predecessor. Just think of the money he could have made instead of, helping out poor people and building homes. I mean, what a waste of time. My goodness. Let me ask, not to be flip, because this is such a serious matter. When you think about this, you've obviously been thinking about this for some time. One would have hoped that this information could have come into public view and been given serious consideration. But I think we know, given the quality of commercial press, that's probably never going to happen. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And the work that you're doing here to expose this is absolutely incredibly important. But I'm afraid that the public the public timeline of what passes for election season is really not going to make this possible. If you were to look at your crystal ball and to say to yourself, honestly, would the Obama administration Justice Department do anything to stop the Clinton juggernaut? And what will probably fall from that, of course, because we know that there are serious anti-Clinton forces in this country, which will, I guess, almost guarantee that whether it's just before she hits the White House or just after she hits the White House, that this is going to be one more crippled Clinton administration.
Well, there's so many different ways this can go. Like I said, I believe pretty firmly that the FBI is going to come out with something before the Democratic convention. They've been making noises for quite a while now that they're almost done. They're almost done. They've said that they're done now, except for one last step, which is to interview Clinton herself, and that's supposed to come, I think, likely in the next week or two. There was some talk that they wanted to wait until, I read recently some scuttlebutt, they wanted to wait until after the last primaries before they did that. But there's still, it's not all the way until the end of July, so it'd be hard. If they were to stall for longer than that, they would come under some very withering criticism of, why didn't you put out your report before? Are you trying to throw the election for the Republicans? Because Comey is himself a Republican. So I think to avoid that, they almost have to come out with this before the convention. But then, then that opens a whole can of worms, because it's such a high-profile case. I think just the whatever they recommend, regardless of what the Justice Department then decides to do, that's going to be big news. That's going to be front-page news. Imagine if it were to come out and it says the FBI recommends felony charges on Hillary Clinton. That's going to be big. And it's my hope that at that point the Democrats would wise up and say, uh-oh, we better go to plan B here. But, who knows? We don't know. It may take longer. They may not come out with something that strong. But then this story is not over, because the Republicans are just chomping at the bit. I'm convinced that they know a lot more than they're letting on at this point, and they're sitting on some stuff about the Clinton Foundation and other related matters, because why bring it out now? They want to wait until it will have maximum political impact in order to, have best chance to get the Republicans to win the White House. So we're going to hear a lot more about this as the campaign goes on. There's a lot of opposition research, I'm sure, going on, and Donald Trump is going to be out there every day hammering. He calls her Crooked Hillary, and this is going to be like his main theme. But even then, so let's say he wins, or let's say Hillary wins, whoever wins in November, it's still not going to be over, because if the Republicans win, then they hate Clinton so much. And Bill and Hillary, they've had a kind of a personal vendetta going back a long, long time. They're not just going to let this drop. They would use this as a political football, as much as they can. And if she wins, then the same thing's going to happen. The Republicans will control the House in almost any scenario, and they will have hearing after hearing. They might start impeachment hearings. I mean, they're just going to keep pushing this and pushing this. And meanwhile, there's all these civil cases that are going on. There's something like 30 different lawsuits. all these emails of her associates and so forth are coming out every month. That's going to continue into 2018 probably. There's a steady drip of more evidence coming out that always seems to uncover new things to make her look bad. So this is going to be something that I think, if you're a informed voter, an intelligent person following politics, you need to understand this, because this is not, like a quote-unquote nothing burger like people say. This has got some real meat to it, and this is something that we're going to be continually hearing about for years to come.
I have to say that if I was to put myself in the Republican shoes, as unpleasant an idea that may be, if I was a political operative on that side of the fence, I would wait until November 1st.
Right.
I would
or
hold
October
fire,
or thereabouts.
Right. And until literally there was nothing that could be said in that short period of time. And as you point out, that even if this was to be, the Justice Department refused to prosecute, the FBI watered it down for professional courtesy's sake, let's say. You're right. This is going to be a taint on the Clinton administration. And the other thing is, you have to say, where you've got a situation where the Secretary of State is making deals, making discussions, having arrangements, and working out fiscal warfare, international treaties, international relations, international business terms, while her husband's running an organization that is passing large financial sums in different directions. The potential, that cleaner than Caesar's wife sort of thing, it should have been the rule of the day. And clearly, they were within 50,000 miles of that.
Yeah, and I also want to bring up something else, which I think is another wrinkle. I mean, this is such an interesting situation we got going on, which is that historically you've got 95% of the people in the FBI and in agencies like that, like the CIA, are usually Republican, very right-wing, sometimes fervently right-wing type people. And there's not a lot of love for Hillary Clinton in the FBI. And there's already been some rumblings that from within the FBI that I've seen in the media that if Comey were to get cold feet and basically come out with very weak recommendations, that there would be leaks from disgruntled members within the FBI, because they've been working on this. It's become, sure, I imagine, for a lot of them, their passion, where they've been spending their entire last year on this and that compiling. I mean, we just look at what we know in the public record, which is reflected in the timeline, and we see so many things, in my opinion, that are just open and shut. Like, this is a criminal slam dunk. Like for instance, she was supposed to turn over all her work-related emails. She even signed a legally binding oath in a court case saying, yes, I've turned over all my work-related emails, and then more and more keep coming out. So right there, you have obstruction of justice, you have destruction of evidence. I mean, it's just, those emails, there's no getting around it. If there was just one or two or a handful, but there's so many that are work-related and coming out that she did not turn over. So just that alone, how do you not charge her on that if you're looking at this the same way that you would from a lower-level employee who did the same thing? So these FBI people have, I think, good reason to get really mad if they see that this was squelched just because of the sheer political power of Hillary Clinton's position, and they're going to, I think, raise quite a stink. So that's another wrinkle that we may be seeing in the future. I'm sure there's going to be around the time that report is coming out, there's going to be just leaks all over the place.
Well, I think that given what passes for for civic practice. Whether it was the videotapes of the CIA's quote enhanced interrogation techniques, and so many other documents that basically disappear through malfeasance of office holders. I honestly have very little hope that it'll come out any other way than through that kind of personal vendetta releases that you basically described coming from.
Yeah, one other thing I want to say to this is, I've been disappointed oftentimes, like you said, about the Obama administration not really going after the things they should have gone after. Like if we look at the financial crisis of 2008 and what the bankers did with the mortgage fraud and so forth, it was just clearly criminal, and nobody got punished, right? That's an outrage, but the difference is between a situation like that and a situation like this is that there never was a serious investigation to begin with in these other cases, whereas we know dozens of FBI agents working on this for a long time. And once they've gotten that far, you can't just put the genie back in the bottle and say, hey, everybody, just forget everything you've learned about this. And I think not only are we going to get some kind of action from the FBI about this, but I find it very interesting that just in the last week or two, there is this case of Terry McAuliffe, who, as you probably know, is the governor of Virginia and a Democrat and one of Clinton's longtime friends, close personal ally, gave Bill and Hillary money, loaned them money when they were hard up for money and so forth. So this is not just, another politician. And this person, Terry McAuliffe, is under investigation by the FBI, and it turns out that it's related. We don't know really the full story, but it's somehow related to the Clinton Foundation and money that was going to his campaign, but then also money that was going to the Clinton Foundation. So, perhaps I think it's probable that could be an offshoot out of what they've been learning from looking into the Clinton Foundation as part of this whole email investigation. We could find other other leads coming out, because I think it's just kind of like a really big can of worms that has been waiting there for someone to open.
Well, Paul, I really want to thank you for the fine work that you've done. You've done a real service, and I hope that your work gets distributed very widely. Are you looking to have this published in book form as well?
Not really. Like I said, my focus is on this immediate time scale. I really want to see something done. I feel like we're in a kind of a war of words to frame this, because I'm sure when more information comes out, like whatever the FBI decides to do, Hillary and her team is just going to continue to give excuses and say, oh well, they're biased against me, or whatever their excuse of the week is going to be. And so there needs to be some resource where people can point to and look at the facts and make a decision for themselves. So this is all happening so fast that I think a book is kind of irrelevant.
Well, sir, thanks again for your time, and as you continue to go through this material, you're always welcome to drop us a note and come back and share with our audience the next exciting chapter of as the email gets shredded.
Sure, and so just remember, people, that it's ThompsonTimeline.com, and we're always looking for people who want to help out, and it's a growing project, a wiki-based project that we want everyone of whatever their political stripes may be to help out, because these are just the facts, and we want to be kind of a spin-free zone.
Well, I hope that the American people who are capable of paying attention do understand the significance of this situation. because God knows we'll never hear from the commercial press. But thanks again, Paul. Wonderful work, and we'll be checking out your website. Why don't you give them that address again?
Yeah, Thompson Timeline with a P, THOMPSON, ThompsonTimeline.com. And thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, our pleasure, sir. Thanks again.